My English mistakes and what they taught me. When I started learning English, I thought the most important thing was knowing a lot of words. I bought vocabulary books, memorized long lists, and repeated them every day. But when I tried to speak with someone, my mind went completely blank. I knew the words, but I couldn't use them. That was my first big mistake, thinking that memorizing vocabulary in isolation would automatically make me fluent. What I learned from this was that words without context are like bricks without mortar. They don't build anything useful unless you know how to place them together. I remember one moment very clearly. I was in a language exchange event, excited and nervous, and I wanted to say, "I'm excited to be here." But instead, I said, "I'm exited to be here," confusing the pronunciation and spelling. The person I was speaking to smiled kindly and corrected me. I felt embarrassed, but also thankful. That moment taught me that it's okay to make mistakes, and more importantly, that making mistakes in front of people is actually a fast track to improvement, if you let yourself learn from them. Another mistake I made was avoiding speaking until I felt ready. I kept telling myself, "I'll start speaking when I know enough grammar, when I sound perfect, when I'm more confident." But that moment never came. Months passed, and I was still not speaking. One day I realized that confidence doesn't come before speaking, it comes because of speaking. So I forced myself to join a speaking club. At first I said only short sentences. Sometimes I froze. Sometimes I mixed up my tenses. But after a few weeks, something amazing happened. My confidence grew. I was finally using the English I'd been learning for so long. I also remember how I tried to translate everything from my native language to English. In my head, I would first think the sentence in my own language, then try to convert it word by word into English. The result? Very unnatural sentences. Worse, I got stuck trying to find perfect translations, which slowed down my speaking. It wasn't until I started thinking in English, even simple thoughts like, "I'm hungry" or "It's a nice day," that my fluency really improved. I began labeling things in English around my room, talking to myself, and slowly building the habit of internal dialogue in English. Listening was another area where I made mistakes. I used to listen to podcasts or YouTube videos while doing other things, washing dishes, walking outside, or browsing my phone. I thought it was helping. But actually, I wasn't paying attention. My brain was not focused. It felt like background noise. One day, I tried active listening instead. I chose a 5-minute clip, listened with full attention, paused after each sentence, repeated the phrases aloud, and wrote down expressions I didn't know. That 5 minutes taught me more than hours of passive listening ever did. Grammar was also a source of struggle. I bought a thick grammar book and read it like a novel, from page 1 to the end. It was painful. I remembered very little, and most of it didn't stick. Later, I discovered that learning grammar in context, through real examples, short stories, and dialogues, made it easier and more memorable. Instead of reading about the past perfect, I listened to someone telling a story about their weekend and heard how they used it naturally. That's when it finally clicked. One of the funniest mistakes I made was mixing up similar-sounding words. I once told someone, "I'm very embarrassed," when I meant to say I'm very shy. I didn't know that embarrassed had a stronger meaning. The person laughed kindly and explained. I learned the difference. And I also learned that people are usually understanding when you're learning their language. They don't expect perfection. They appreciate the effort. Another thing I did wrong was relying too much on subtitles. I used to watch movies with English audio and subtitles in my language. It made me feel like I understood a lot. But I wasn't really listening. I was reading. My ears weren't improving. When I switched to English subtitles, my comprehension dropped at first, but gradually, I got used to hearing and reading English at the same time. Finally, I turned off subtitles completely and just listened. It was hard, but it was worth it. My listening skills improved dramatically. I also didn't realize how important it was to review regularly. I used to learn something and then move on, thinking it was enough. But without reviewing, I kept forgetting things. Spaced repetition became a game changer. I started using apps that reminded me to review words and phrases at the right time. I also created a weekly habit of reviewing my notebook, rereading dialogues, and practicing old material. It wasn't exciting, but it worked. Pronunciation was something I ignored for a long time. I thought it didn't matter as long as people understood me. But the truth is, pronunciation affects how confident you feel and how well others can understand you. When I finally started mimicking native speakers, recording my voice, and practicing difficult sounds like the or r, I noticed a big difference, not only in how I sounded, but in how people reacted to me. They understood me more easily, and I felt more comfortable speaking. There was also a time when I believed that studying harder meant studying longer hours. I would sit for hours trying to cram vocabulary or grammar rules, but I was exhausted and frustrated. Then I read about the idea of focused, short sessions. I tried studying for just 25 minutes, then taking a break. To my surprise, I learned more in less time. I was more alert, more motivated, and less overwhelmed. One last mistake I made was comparing myself to others. I would see someone speaking fluently and think, why am I not that good yet? It made me feel discouraged, but I realized that everyone's journey is different. Some people have more time, more exposure, or started earlier. What matters is progress, not perfection. Once I focused on my own improvement, I started enjoying the process more. All these mistakes were not failures, they were lessons. Each one helped me understand myself better and adjust my methods. I no longer fear making mistakes. I welcome them as part of learning, because with every mistake, I grow. As I continued learning English, I realized that one of the biggest mistakes I was making, without even knowing it, was trying to be perfect. I was so focused on not making errors that I stopped myself from speaking at all. I wanted every sentence to be grammatically correct, every pronunciation flawless, every word precise. But that pressure created fear. It made me hesitate, and hesitation is the enemy of fluency. Eventually, I had to accept that mistakes are not just natural. They're essential. Language is a living thing, and we only master it by using it, even imperfectly. Another lesson came when I realized I was ignoring idioms and informal expressions. I was learning textbook English, the kind of English that sounds great on a test, but doesn't reflect how people actually speak. I once said to a native speaker, "I am feeling very happy today," and they smiled and replied, "Glad to hear. You're in high spirits, huh?" I didn't understand the phrase "in high spirits." That made me realize how much I was missing by not learning everyday language. I began to keep a notebook just for idioms and expressions I heard in conversations, TV shows, or podcasts. That one habit made my English sound more natural and helped me understand more in real-life situations. I also misunderstood the role of reading in language learning. I used to read only simple articles or graded readers, thinking they were easier and therefore better. But they didn't challenge me. They didn't expose me to the rich variety of vocabulary and sentence structures in real English. One day, I picked up a novel written for native speakers. It was difficult. I had to look up many words. But I kept going, and slowly, things started to click. I was learning new phrases, recognizing patterns, and feeling more comfortable with complex language. That experience taught me that it's okay to struggle with difficult material. It's a sign that you're growing. Another mistake was trying to learn everything at once. I would jump from topic to topic. One day, business English, the next day, slang, then back to grammar. I wasn't building depth in any one area. I was collecting knowledge without consolidating it. That changed when I started choosing weekly themes. One week focusing on phrasal verbs, the next on pronunciation, then on listening skills. That focus helped me build stronger foundations in each skill. Instead of spreading myself thin, I was going deep, and that made a difference in how much I retained and how confidently I used what I learned. I also fell into the trap of skipping writing practice. I thought, I want to speak, not write, so why waste time writing? But writing helped me organize my thoughts, discover gaps in my knowledge, and reflect on what I was learning. I began journaling in English every evening. At first, it was just a few sentences, but gradually, it became a habit. Writing about my day, my goals, or even what I learned that day helped reinforce vocabulary and grammar. And the best part? I started thinking in English more naturally. One of the more surprising mistakes I made was underestimating the importance of intonation and rhythm. I thought if I got the words and grammar right, that was enough. But my sentences sounded robotic. Native speakers have a musical quality to their speech. The ups and downs, the stress on certain words, the flow of phrases. I started shadowing native speakers, mimicking not just their words but their tone, pauses, and rhythm. That changed how I sounded and how people reacted to me. They understood me better and said I sounded more natural. There was also a time when I relied too heavily on language learning apps. Don't get me wrong, they're great tools, but I was spending too much time collecting badges and points instead of practicing real communication. I realized that apps are supplements, not substitutes. The real progress happens when you use English in the wild, in conversations, messages, or even thinking out loud. I started messaging friends in English, commenting on English YouTube videos, and even narrating my actions at home. I'm washing the dishes, I'd say to myself. It sounds silly, but it works. It built fluency. I remember one phase when I focused so much on accent reduction that I forgot about comprehension. I wanted to sound American or British, but I couldn't understand fast native speech. That was a mistake. Understanding comes before imitation. I shifted my focus to listening, really listening. I slowed down videos, used transcripts, and listened multiple times. Once I could understand naturally, I started picking up the accent without forcing it. That taught me that comprehension is the first step, not pronunciation. I also made the mistake of studying too late at night when I was tired. I thought I was being dedicated, but I wasn't absorbing much. I'd reread the same paragraph 5 times and still not understand it. One day, I switched my routine and started studying for just 20 minutes in the morning before breakfast. The difference was shocking. I was fresh, focused, and everything made more sense. I learned that quality matters more than quantity, and that when your brain is alert, learning feels easier. Another powerful lesson came when I stopped learning alone. For a long time, I studied in isolation, reading books, watching videos, and doing exercises by myself. But language is social. When I joined a community of learners, everything changed. I had people to share goals with, ask questions, and celebrate progress. It kept me motivated. Learning became fun. Even exchanging short messages with someone else made me feel like I was part of something. That sense of connection made the process more human and more effective. At one point, I also focused too much on American English and ignored other accents and styles. Then I met an English speaker from Australia, and I could hardly understand them. I felt embarrassed. That taught me that English is not one voice. It's many. I started listening to accents from the UK, Ireland, South Africa, and India. It made me more flexible and better prepared for real-world conversations. One final mistake I want to share is the trap of not reviewing my goals. I had goals like speak fluently or understand movies, but I never checked my progress. I just kept studying without direction. Then I began checking in with myself every Sunday. I asked, what did I improve this week? What confused me? What do I want to learn next? That simple habit helped me stay focused and motivated. I became more intentional, and my learning became faster. Through all of this, I learned that mistakes are not the opposite of success. They are the path to success. Every error taught me something. Every challenge made me stronger. And every day, I felt more like a real English speaker. Not because I was perfect, but because I kept going. Over time, one of the greatest realizations I had was that perfectionism is the silent killer of fluency. I was so obsessed with avoiding mistakes that I forgot the point of language is connection, not perfection. Every time I hesitated, reworded, or stayed silent for fear of being wrong, I was building a wall between myself and real communication. The moment I let go of the idea that I had to sound like a native speaker right away, I began to truly grow. I began to laugh at my mistakes and treat them like teachers. I even started collecting funny grammar mistakes in a notebook just to remind myself that errors are part of the journey. I also realized that learning English in isolation was limiting me. For too long, I was afraid to talk to others because I didn't want to be judged. I avoided speaking with real people and stuck to books and videos. But eventually, I challenged myself to join an online language exchange group. The first time I spoke, I was so nervous I forgot how to say because. But the people I spoke with were kind, patient, and supportive. That conversation taught me something that no grammar book ever could. Courage grows when you use your voice, not when you hide it. A big turning point came when I discovered the power of feedback. Before that, I was studying and practicing in a vacuum. No one was correcting me, and I didn't know whether I was improving. I started recording myself and comparing my speech to native speakers. Then I joined a forum where people could give each other pronunciation tips. It was scary at first, but incredibly helpful. A kind stranger once pointed out that I always dropped the S at the end of plural words. That small piece of advice changed my entire speaking style. Feedback was no longer scary. It became my secret weapon. Another mistake I made was believing that learning more vocabulary automatically made me fluent. I used to memorize hundreds of words without understanding how to use them. I had flashcards for perplexed, astonishing, intriguing. But I couldn't form a natural sentence with them. That changed when I began to study vocabulary in context. I stopped collecting rare words and started learning common expressions used in real conversations. I watched scenes from movies, repeated lines, and paid attention to how words work together. Suddenly, my sentences flowed. It was like learning the music of the language, not just the notes. Then came the grammar tunnel. There was a time I became obsessed with mastering grammar rules. I downloaded guides, watched endless videos, and corrected every sentence I wrote. But the more I focused on grammar, the more robotic my English sounded. I could write a perfect essay, but I couldn't hold a natural conversation. I realized I needed to step back. I shifted my focus to fluency, not accuracy. I gave myself permission to speak without thinking about rules. Ironically, once I relaxed, my grammar improved naturally through use and exposure. I also misunderstood the purpose of listening practice. I used to play English videos in the background while doing other tasks, thinking I was improving my listening skills. But passive listening wasn't enough. I had to be active. I started using a technique where I would listen to one short clip 5 times. First, just listening. Second, with subtitles. Third, repeating aloud. Fourth, writing what I heard. Fifth, checking my transcription. It took time, but my comprehension skyrocketed. I was finally training my ears, not just exposing them to sound. Another habit I abandoned too late was translating everything into my native language. At first, it felt helpful, even necessary. But I reached a point where it became a crutch. I couldn't think in English because I was constantly switching back and forth. I remember once reading a sentence in English and thinking, "Wait, how do I say that in my language?" instead of the other way around. So I began to push myself to define English words using other English words. I started thinking in English, writing definitions, and asking, "What does this feel like?" instead of, "What does this mean in my language?" That shift changed everything. My mind began operating in English, not just decoding it. I also underestimated how much mindset affects learning. I used to feel like English was a mountain I had to climb, and I was constantly at the bottom. I compared myself to others and felt discouraged. But then I read a quote that said, "Don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle." That hit me hard. I realized I was making progress every day, even if it was invisible. I began celebrating small wins, understanding a joke, finishing a podcast, having a smooth conversation. Those wins gave me energy. English became less of a burden and more of a journey. One powerful lesson came from using English in real tasks. I used to practice English only during study time, but the real breakthrough happened when I made English a tool for living. I changed my phone settings to English, watched cooking videos, and followed the recipes in English, and even played games with English instructions. I emailed friends, wrote my to-do lists in English, and started a blog where I wrote short articles. The more English became part of my life, the more natural it felt. It stopped being a subject and started being a language I used. Eventually, I also stopped underestimating pronunciation. I thought I could skip it since I already knew the words. But when I tried speaking, people often asked me to repeat myself. That's when I realized pronunciation isn't about sounding native. It's about being understood. I started focusing on mouth position, stress patterns, and sentence melody. I shadowed English speakers, slowed down YouTube videos, and recorded myself daily. Over time, people started understanding me more easily, and I started feeling more confident. Clear pronunciation built bridges between me and the world. There was one more mistake, perhaps the most important. I used to think I had to reach a certain level before I could call myself an English speaker. I thought that title belonged only to natives or advanced learners. But one day, a friend told me, "If you use English, you are an English speaker." That simple truth changed everything. I stopped waiting for a label and started owning my identity. I was an English speaker in progress, and proud of it. One of the last but most impactful mistakes I made was expecting fast results. I thought that if I studied hard for a few weeks, my fluency would skyrocket. I expected to wake up one day and suddenly speak like a native. But that didn't happen. And when it didn't, I felt defeated. I even stopped learning for a few weeks because I thought maybe I wasn't talented enough. But then I remembered something I had read in a book. Language learning is like growing a tree. You water it every day, but you don't see it growing until one day, it's there. That quote made me realize that growth happens silently, beneath the surface. I just had to keep showing up. That's when I embraced consistency over intensity. I started studying a little every day instead of burning out with long sessions. 10 minutes of focused effort each day proved more effective than cramming for hours once a week. I made a habit of listening to a short English podcast during breakfast, writing a journal entry at night, and reviewing vocabulary during walks. These tiny actions added up. And slowly, my English grew stronger, almost without me noticing. It wasn't magic. It was momentum. Another turning point was letting go of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of sounding foolish. I used to replay awkward conversations in my head, criticizing every mistake I made. But that only made me more anxious. So I tried something new. I treated every mistake as evidence that I was trying. I began to see my errors as signs of bravery, not shame. I even made it a goal to make one new mistake each day. It turned the fear into a game. And the more I practiced, the less scary it felt. I learned to be kind to myself, to cheer myself on, not tear myself down. Reflecting on all these experiences, I realized that learning English taught me much more than grammar or vocabulary. It taught me life skills, patience, resilience, adaptability. It taught me how to keep going when progress felt invisible. It taught me how to listen, not just to words, but to people. It taught me how to laugh at myself and grow from every stumble. These lessons went beyond language. They reshaped who I was. One of the best choices I made during my journey was to stop learning alone. I joined online communities, made friends from different countries, and practiced with real people. Language came alive when it became part of human connection. I joined an online book club, participated in English challenges, and even helped beginners by sharing my story. Being part of a community reminded me that I wasn't alone. Everyone was learning. Everyone was growing. We were all in this together. I also learned the value of celebrating small wins. At first, I waited for big milestones, like passing a test or understanding a full movie, before feeling proud. But that took too long. So I changed my approach. I started celebrating when I learned a new idiom, when I understood a fast speaker, when I ordered food in English without hesitation. These little victories gave me fuel. They reminded me that progress wasn't always loud, but it was always there. A technique that helped me greatly was storytelling. Instead of just learning grammar rules, I began creating short stories using what I had learned. I would invent a character and describe their day using present simple, then imagine their dreams using future tense. Storytelling made grammar fun and meaningful. It also improved my speaking and writing. Suddenly, English wasn't just a subject. It became a creative tool. I was using it to imagine, to express, to connect. And I loved it. There was also a time I focused too much on native accents. I wanted to sound exactly like an American or British speaker. I practiced intonation, mimicked tones, and even tried to change my natural voice. But it was exhausting and fake. Over time, I realized that clarity matters more than accent. People understood me better when I spoke with confidence, not when I tried to imitate someone else. I learned to embrace my unique voice. And I discovered that people respect effort far more than perfection. One day, I had a conversation with a tourist who didn't speak my native language. We talked in English. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. We laughed, we shared stories, we connected. At the end, he said, "Your English is really good." And for the first time, I believed it. Not because I was perfect, but because I communicated. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me of why I started learning English in the first place, not to impress others, but to connect. Looking back, every mistake I made had a lesson hidden inside it. Each one pushed me forward, even if it felt like a setback at the time. The journey wasn't straight or smooth. It was full of detours, bumps, and surprises, but it was mine. And it was worth it. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't erase those mistakes. I'd walk through them again, this time with more patience and gratitude. If you're learning English and feeling stuck, I want you to know this. Mistakes are not the enemy. They are the guideposts. They show you where to grow. Don't fear them. Welcome them. Keep going. Keep speaking. Keep writing. Celebrate your efforts no matter how small. And remember, every fluent speaker was once a beginner, just like you. You don't need perfect grammar to have a voice. You don't need a native accent to tell your story. You don't need flawless vocabulary to connect with others. What you need is heart. You need courage. And you already have that. So use it. Make English part of your life, not just your studies. Sing in English. Laugh in English. Think in English. Fail in English. But don't give up. Because on the other side of those mistakes, there's fluency. There's freedom. There's a version of you who speaks with confidence, who listens with ease, who shares their story without fear. And that version of you is not far away. In fact, they're already inside you, waiting for you to keep going. Thank you for listening to this episode of English 101. Remember, every mistake is a part of your success story. Keep practicing, keep learning, and don't be afraid to stumble, because every step forward begins with a small fall. See you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and speak English every day.